Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. And today I finally want to show off the non-K overclocking capability of the Z170 OC formula. So, I talked about that this board can overclock non-K CPUs a while ago when I first took a look at it, but I never quite knew how that worked. And well, now I do. And it's a lot easier than I thought. So I first thought you need a modified BIOS to enable that. And that is kind of true, but as it turns out, said modified BIOS is just a first-party BIOS from ASRock. They just added non-K overclocking to their BIOS at some point. They removed it again with another update, presumably because Intel told them so, because I don't see why they would remove it anyway, otherwise. But yeah, so I'm on version 2.20 for the BIOS. And this one does still have the Sky OC function, as they call it. And there's not even like a special setting in BIOS that you need to enable or anything. I first looked up through some tutorials of people doing it because I thought there was something, but then I found out oh no, it just you just install the BIOS and you can now set more than 103 BCLK and it will work. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So let's get to the capture card. So we are in BIOS. I have the Celeron G3900 installed, and as you can see, the stock CPU speed is 2.8 gigahertz. Now, while you see the BIOS splash screen, there is a thing that's called press X to enable Sky OC boost. You don't need to do that, enable to overclock. As far as I know, that just adds 10 BCLK. It just gives you 110 instead of 100. So a 10% boost in clocks. But we want to go a bit higher than 10% because this is a Skylake CPU. It's just a dual core, not even hyper-threaded one. But it's still a Skylake CPU. So high 4 gigahertz region is where this is gonna go. And well, I know for a fact it goes there. I have pre-tested the CPU. But let's just keep the stock settings for now. And just run 3D Mark 11 once, so we can have a general idea of how this performs. And then we're gonna give it a lot of BCLK. Now there are of course some issues with this thing, so basically that there you can see it press X to enable. I don't have it enabled and we will still be able to overclock as you'll see soon. But yeah, there's a couple issues with this BIOS that can potentially be solved by just trying other BIOS versions that also support this function. I'm just on the newest that has it. But yeah, we'll get to that later. So we're gonna open up CPU-Z. Now we see Celeron G3900, and we are at 2.8. Well, actually, the bot seems to give 0.9 BCLK just extra out of the box. So we are not exactly at 2.8 gigahertz. We actually get a quarter gigahertz, not a quarter gigahertz, 25 megahertz extra. But other than that, everything's stock. Even the memory is stock. We'll get to that later, why that is. But let's run 3D Mark 11 physics. And let's get a baseline score. Sure, taking its sweet time now. Oh, there we go. I just hope it doesn't crash. I just tested it, it does work, but there was an earlier take today where it just wouldn't run. It was so bad it actually broke my Windows install. I don't know what happened, but it just got really unstable. So I get just about 10 FPS. The difference is gonna be big enough that you can actually see it in FPS, not just the final score. Even though this is rather low FPS. The thing is, these CPUs at 2.8 gigahertz are pretty slow. Like, I don't want to spoil it yet, but there's gonna be a substantial clock speed increase. It also takes so long to finish. At least the CPU is not getting hot with that water cooler on it. The CPU is also delidded. It doesn't have liquid metal on it, just put paste. But, yeah. Okay, so 3101. Just keep that in mind. So yeah, like 3100. Let's just say 3100. Let's go back into BIOS. And let's overclock a bit. Nice thing about this board is you can see the postcode actually. On the Apex it would have been covered by the tubes. Come on, where's the BIOS? There we are. Now my BIOS profiles are gonna spoil it a little bit. Just pretend you don't see that. So, yeah, so since this is a locked CPU, the multiplier remains locked. This BIOS doesn't unlock the multiplier. You overclock the CPU with BCLK, similar to how you overclock LGA 775 CPUs, just here it's base clock instead of FSB. So, normally your base clock is at 100, like this. Now, for some reason the board seems to raise base clock to like about here-ish. But yeah, so usually locked CPUs max out at like 103, which isn't even a full 100 megahertz above stock. Usually if you try to post more than this, it will just refuse to post. And what this special BIOS does that we have, well, it's not really special, it's just straight up a first party ASRock BIOS. It's just a certain version that you have to use. It allows us to go higher. So we can do like 110, which should be what the boost thing does when you press X. We can do 120, we can do 150. Now we're above 4 gigahertz. We can in fact do 4.8 gigahertz on the CPU. There might be a little bit more in there. I desperately tried to get 5 gigahertz working on this, because, you know, it's just a very nice number. But after 4.8, this thing just runs into a brick wall. Like, even at 1.55 volts, 5 gigahertz wouldn't even get into Windows. And even with a CPU that doesn't get hot like this, that kind of voltage just kind of becomes too much. So, yeah. It's 4.8 now. You know, I've been thinking about potentially getting like a 6700 or 6600. Probably gonna have better memory controller than this too. You know, just to have a little bit more locked CPU fun with something that's actually not just a dual core without hyperthreading. But yeah, 4.8. That's still pretty good. Like, in terms of single core speed, this is gonna, well, yeah, in raw single core speed, this is probably gonna beat a 6700K that's stock, or even slightly overclocked. Like, they should have the same amount of IPC as a 6700K. And, like, from what I've seen, most people, well, at like 4.4 or like 4.6, which isn't even that high. So, like, yeah, unless you have a 6700K. Well, actually, because this doesn't have hyperthreading, this even gets a little single core boost. So, yeah, because like hyperthreading, you know, gives you roughly 30% more all core, but it takes a little bit away from your single core performance. This thing doesn't have hyperthreading, so this might be even faster than a 6700K at 4.8 in terms of single core speed. Now, in total speed, this is still gonna get shit-faced, and in gaming, it's probably also not gonna be that great. But, you know, theoretically, it's pretty fast single core speed. Now, in terms of voltage, we go right up to the max, and we set level 2. I used to be at level 3, and that worked just fine yesterday. And then I booted up today for the first video take, and it just crashed. So now we are at level 2. That just worked. Like I literally right before the video, I just tested that. And so coming back to the memory thing, you see what it says target memory speed 3655, which this kit can do. This is Hynix CJR. This can do 4000. Not very stable. It is stable at like 3800, which is still more than what we're gonna try now. Problem is, once we boot, this is not gonna be at 3655. It's gonna be at like 1824. And I tried to fix that. It seems to just not work. It might be the BIOS. Well, it most likely is the BIOS, because I had like 3600 working on this before. Now, even if I don't touch BCLK, this doesn't run XMP anymore. And the XMP is 3600, 17, 19, 19, 39 or something. It's not hard to run. Like, even for CJR, that's kind of loose. So this BIOS seems to just kind of destroy your memory stability, because like I can literally not set anything else except auto on the memory, and it will not post. But you know, like now we're posted, but memory, yeah. Yeah. So we had like 1828. Like the timings are tighter than what you could get at 3600 on CJR, but like, you know, DDR3 does 3860, not 38. DDR3 does 1866 pretty easily. This is not 1866, this is slower than that. And I'm pretty sure that DDR3 does not do seal like 13, 13, 13. I think that does like 11 or 10. So, yeah, the RAM's pretty slow. I also just noticed the Encore is at 4.8. Maybe that's why the weird crashing occurred, because usually your Encore is like not as high as the cores, and it seems on this CPU it's synced, and I never noticed that before. Maybe that's why it runs into a brick wall. Maybe the cores can actually do like 5 GHz, but the Encore probably just can't. And I'm not aware of a way to unsync those. Anyway, so let's run 3 Mach 11 at 4.8 GHz. Like the score's still gonna be better, even though the memory we just lost memory speed. I'm just gonna hope that it actually passes now. But you can already see, like, we're not getting 10 FPS anymore, now we're getting like 14. It's creeping up towards 14.5, 14.7. Do we get 15? It seems to have stabilized at like 14.6, 14.7. So we're not quite getting 15 FPS, but like, yeah, like that in raw FPS, that's like 25% more already. Which is not that great of a scaling, like, because we've added more than 25% core clock, but then again, the RAM thing just happened. And yeah, now we have 4500. 3100 before, 4500 now. That's 1300 extra points. You know? Like, that's still a very measurable difference. I'm just kind of bummed out that the memory part doesn't work. Like, and also one thing you need to be aware of, this Windows install is very new because my other one just broke earlier. So if we do something like core temp, yeah, this is bugged out. So once you start overclocking like non-K CPUs, a bunch of stuff happens. Like you might be able to see it doesn't idle; it's just going full tilt all the time. Also, the multiplier reporting is like really off, and yeah, so the temperature sensors are also like broken. Hardware info does work, but you need to look at a specific sensor. So let's get hardware info. So this one's also like weird, but this one, no, this one right here should be accurate. I mean, it's the only sensor that works. And yeah, I mean, it's a dual core. It's not running very hot, like, yeah. But you like a bunch of stuff, it's not meant to be overclocked, so stuff breaks. So yeah. But other than that, like, it does work. At least for the CPU part, it's really simple. Just set BCLK, set voltage, and there you go. Problem being, your RAM tends to do weird things. I mean, it's probably, like, it has to be the BIOS, because it ran fine before. Now it doesn't. And I was on an older version before. I was on 1.40 before. Now I'm at 2.20. So it's not like, oh, you're on an older BIOS and now it doesn't work as well anymore. No, I'm on a newer one yet. And it worked at 3600 before. So, yeah. So something with this non-K overclocking BIOS breaks memory. Things that might potentially make this worse is like this CPU having a very bad memory controller, because like it's a dual-core Celeron. Like the low-end CPUs usually suck in terms of memory controllers. And then also, this is 8 gigabit CJR. This board is from an era when most overclocking memory was 4 gigabit. Like actually in the BIOS it has like pre-made overclocking profiles for some memory chips, and they're all 4 gigabit. And then also, the PCB that this RAM uses is different. It uses an A2 PCB, and the memory back then was on an A0 PCB, which has like different termination resistances, and like the PCB behaves differently, and the motherboard's optimized for the other one, not this one. So that potentially makes it worse. Like maybe if I had like some A0 4 gigabit eDie, I might be able to like do a little bit of memory stuff, so I can maybe get like 3200 or something working. But on this stuff, like even 2133 just doesn't even post. Like it gets stuck at 19 or like 32, 35, or just other random postcodes. Yeah, so there's a couple issues, but as you can see in the score, it's still faster. I'm just kind of bummed out that the memory is like weird, and you can't really do anything with it. But yeah, like I'm interested in potentially digging more into this in the future. Like maybe I'll find some cheap like dual rank eDie and like a better CPU. Like ideally I'd want a 6700. As far as I know, Kaby Lake CPUs do not work. Like it has to be a Skylake, or at least I haven't seen anyone use it on Kaby Lake CPUs. I've never seen anyone specifically say it doesn't work on them. Yeah. But, if I have some spare change over at the end of the month, I might grab like a 6700, some A0 eDie, and then, could have a little fun with this board. Until then, well, I now finally figured out how to overclock non-K CPUs, and it's always fun to overclock stuff that you're not supposed to overclock. I just wish the RAM worked better. And I kind of wish I had a better, like, I still got the CPU effectively for free, so I'm not really complaining. But yeah, like, it's cool. It's a non-K CPU at 4.8 gigahertz. And it's like a Skylake. This is like the first, like, this was back when 40 nanometer was cool. Anyway, I think the video is long enough now. Yeah, we're about to crack 20 minutes, so let's prevent that. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.